Hi, I'm Dave Ganskopp with the Agricultural Research Service at the Eastern Oregon Ag Research Center with an Eastern Oregon Ag Minute. Well, we've had cattle on Oregon's rangelands for about 120 years now. Poor livestock distribution remains one of our most challenging problems. Range conservationists on public lands and ranchers handling stock on large deeded properties all have issues to deal with. On the Northern Great Basin Experimental Range, we've run cattle with GPS collars in some of our 2,000-acre pastures, and over a 2 to 3 week period, cows will only visit about 33% of the pasture. This leaves a lot of ground and forage unused that could potentially contribute to one's production goals. Several issues affect cattle distribution on rangelands. Some of these include steep slopes, long distances to water, extremely rocky soils, cow breed, age, and status, daytime high and nighttime low temperatures, and historic patterns of use in a pasture. This week we're talking about factors contributing to poor cattle distribution on rangelands. In recent years, there's been some work studying differences among breeds of cattle and their use of rugged pastures. Dr. Derek Bailey from Montana compared Tarantace cattle developed in the rugged terrain of the French Alps with Herefords historically from Great Britain's lowlands. He found Tarantace used higher elevations and occupied steeper slopes. Similar studies of cattle sired by Angus, Charolais, Piedmont, and Solaire bulls were also conducted. Piedmont cattle from the Italian Alps used higher terrain than Angus progeny that were historically from Scotland's lowlands. Dr. Bailey warned, however, that more study was needed to verify that overall herd grazing patterns can be altered by selection. Possibly, social interactions among animals could eventually override potential breed differences in habits. This week we're discussing factors contributing to cattle distribution issues on rangelands. Studies conducted a few years ago by Derek Bailey in Montana looked at individual cattle in a herd and identified cows that were bottom feeders and those habitually found in lowland areas. These were called hill climbers and bottom feeders. When the herd was moved to other pastures, the cows exhibited the same landscape use patterns. With that thought in mind, Dr. Jeff Mosley spent about 5 years culling bottom feeders from a herd in Montana with hopes of reducing heavy use in streamside areas. He reported just recently at the Society for Range Management meetings in Reno that his efforts were largely unsuccessful. The herd still spent about 31% of its grazing time in riparian areas. The jury is not out on that study, though, because they did not always remove the bottom feeder calves from the herd. That being, the retention of children that acquired bad habits from their mothers may have tainted the study. This week we're discussing some factors contributing to cattle distribution issues on rangelands. Several years ago, we had a graduate student studying the landscape patterns of pastures and trying to predict where cattle would likely go. His best predictor was simply identifying the spots cattle used last year. With that observation, we designed a study where we fenced off one half of several pastures, heavily grazed one side, and let the other side grow. We took the fences out, and the next summer when cattle came back, they spent 70% of their foraging effort on the half that was grazed the previous season. The previously grazed side had about 180 pounds of grass per acre, and the ungrazed areas carried 480 pounds of grass per acre. Cows clearly sought forage quality over quantity, and they clearly didn't like to sort through a mix of old decadent straw and new green grass if they could go elsewhere and simply mow down a crop of green grass. Since then, we've executed a similar study in larger pastures, and we'll talk about that one tomorrow. This week, we're discussing some factors contributing to cattle distribution issues on rangelands. We started a large project 3 years ago where we clipped hundreds of plots in rangeland pastures, analyzed the forage for protein, fiber, and digestibility, and put the data in a geographic information system. This drew maps showing the changes in forage quality across pastures. Next, we stocked the pastures with GPS-collared cattle, put that data in the GIS system, and asked it to tell us what the forage quality was in the areas the cattle used. When the numbers came out, cattle visited about 33% of each pasture. They favored higher than average crude protein, higher than average digestibility, lower than average fiber content, and lower than average standing crops. These results make me think many of the seasonal shifts in use areas by cattle, like the late summer focus on riparian areas, are simply livestock responses to changes in nutrition across the landscape. Their two primary endeavors, eating and ruminating, consume about 75% of each day, so forage quality is likely an important issue. I'm Dave Ganskopp. Be careful out there, and we'll see you again.